continuing series of History Speaks. And happy Halloween, before I forget. I'm Chris, I'm a volunteer here at the Historical Society. And just because I'm curious, how many of you have been to a History Speaks lecture before? Wow. Thank you for coming again. We appreciate it. And we do have our list of 2016 series. If you did not pick that up, you can pick that up on the way out. It's at the table by Linda, who has the visor on there. And before we begin, we want to, of course, thank our sponsors, which are Compass Properties and Yankee Bookstores, who have graciously underwritten this series for the whole year. Just mark your calendars in case you haven't. On November 15th, we continue History Speaks with genealogy once again, and a look at church history and the records that you can use to follow your family. We are very humble. And that's done by Gary Gisselman. And December 5th is our Christmas at the Houses, which is our traditional Christmas with the decorations at the Rocky House and some trees and stuff here at the Woodson History Center. And then, as great as it sounds, we begin our 2016 History Speaks with German genealogy. So as I said, you can get all that in the back. If you're not a member, we'd appreciate you to become a member. And today we have the end of our very special. If you become a member today, we'll throw in a Dracula book for you. Hey, not a bad deal. Or if you already are a member, or do not wish to become a member, which would be sad, we can sell you a book for $5, and the donations or the proceeds from that go back into bringing you these lectures for History Speaks. Don't forget to fill in an evaluation before you leave. We'd appreciate it. That's how we decide what to do in the future and how to do things differently if we need to. And I think that's everything from me. In which case, we welcome our speaker. Our speaker today, well, is Rick Lohr, and he is a member of our board of directors here at the Historical Society. And he was also, is also a retired teacher from the Wausau School District. So without further ado, I give you
after all these centuries, dentures. And glasses. So much for the modern ability of vampires. We're going to take a journey today, and it's both a physical and psychological journey into the nightmares and the things that cause fear in human beings. And so I'm hoping that you're ready. All literature, basically, and all stories, all narratives are journeys. They take you from one place to another, whether in physical setting or in ideas, or but we have to move along a narrative plane to get to a new place, and that's what we're going to try to do today. So here is Dracula, the Romanian and Hungarian origins. When I was a senior in high school at Marathon City High School, we had a class play, senior class play, that was Dracula. My father was the funeral director at Marathon in Edgar, so he donated a casket, and that was sitting up on the stage with the curtain behind. And a good friend of mine, Denny Burns from Marathon, tall, 6'2", thin, long blonde hair, dyed black, and in an outfit like this, was in that for an hour. And as people filed in, and then when they were in and seated, all the lights went out and the spotlight went on the casket, and he slowly lifted the lid, sat up with his back straight, and then he turned to the audience and he showed his fangs. It was wonderful. I played Redfield, who was insane, so I couldn't overact. It was really a lot of fun. And here we have a representation of what Vlad, the original person who becomes the vampire, would have looked like. And it's rather abstract. And it's abstract, I like that, because we have written records to a certain degree, but we depend a lot on stories to fill in what his character was like, who he really was. And so we're going to try to fill it in. But remember that these are stories. Who tells the stories? They wish him ill or wish him well. And we'll try to piece through some of that for us today. Well, the Dracula of our nightmares, where did he come from? This is Christopher Lee and his bloodthirsty guys. In Stoker's 1897 Gothic horror novel, we find out he was a real person. And we'll look back into that. He lived on after death as a vampire. And Bram Stoker, when he read about Vlad, the person that was became his vampire, he admired him. Some of his descriptions in the book is that he had a great mind. He was an excellent military figure. And so he praises him in many ways. So that when we meet up with Dracula, we meet a person of special powers. He's not just an ordinary person. He's a person in real life who was a very strong and strict ruler. Vlad III, 1431 to 1476 is the subject of our discussion today, and Vlad Tepes is his kind of name that was applied to him. Tepes meaning the Impaler. And we'll get more into that a little bit later. Dracula was another of his names, and we'll get into that as well. He was Prince of Wallachia 3 times. His father, Vlad II, joined with the Hungarians to fight against the Turks and the Hussites, against the Muslims, in other words, and against the early Protestant reformers of Czechoslovakia, Czech area around Prague, that rose before Luther. And being a Catholic nation, they fought against them. As an honor by the Hungarian monarchy is awarded the Order of the Dragon. It's actually Dracula. And Drac means dragon, and the UL just makes it the dragon, Order of the Dragon. And but also in Wallachia, Drac means evil. And so he is a prince of Wallachia. So you can imagine how he's taking over as a prince with that kind of name attached to him. Dracula, you add an A to the end of it, and it means son of. So son of the dragon, son of evil. Sounds foreboding already, doesn't it? Well, where's that come from? Well, the legend of St. George represented Christianity and the dragon. He slays the dragon. Christ wins out over evil, and that's what this painting represents. And it is an Eastern legend that basically comes out of the Eastern section, the Orthodox section of Christianity, but it's an iconic image that we all, I think, have seen, or if we haven't, we're seeing it now. And what it is an image, though, of good conquering evil. And Wallachia, being Eastern Orthodox in religion, would have been very familiar with this iconology and would have associated the dragon with evil. So a good-looking man, a man you would want as your principal in school, right? Vlad was a Renaissance man. He was talented. He was intelligent. He was educated as a knight, so he learned how to sword fight and use all the various weapons of the knights, dress up in armor and ride a horse very well. But he also learned Italian, French, Hungarian, Latin, Turkish, Cyrillic script, which would have been kind of the Slavic script. and the politics of the divine right of kings. And what was that politics? That was God named people to be rulers over others, and they were supposed to be obeyed because God anointed them as leader, and you expected obedience. So he does have that rather strict, and he becomes a sadist as well. He's a sadistic prince of Wallachia. Strong leader in the time of chaos. Sadism just means you don't mind hurting people. In fact, you may even enjoy it. And so we'll take a look at that part of him as well. It's a time of great change when the power of feudalism and the church were ebbing. We're almost ready to see the Renaissance, and feudalism and the Middle Ages are disappearing. Well, where did Vlad III live? He lived in Wallachia. That'd be right here. And right up here is Transylvania. And why did Bram Stoker choose his vampire from this location? It was remote. Southeast corner of Europe. An area that was incompletely Christianized and only rather lately Christianized. So a lot of pagan beliefs, a lot of superstitions. People from there were rarely seen in cosmopolitan England. So he could use the innate fear of the stranger, or we might even say the alien, which I think we're using as a term in our generation. There's that fear of what's out there. Who is that strange person from a different background than us? Are they truly human the way they behave and so forth? It's also a wooded area. Mountainous, the Carpathian Mountains are there, and that's what protected small groups of people living in these areas, in isolated areas, so they will exist right up to the time of Dracula. He was a model for Machiavelli's The Prince. Now, some of you might be familiar with that book. It's a Renaissance book. Machiavelli, who just sat down and he said, I'm going to write a book about not how politicians should behave, but how politicians do behave. And I'm going to look at the good examples of leaders who know what they're doing. And he came up with the idea that after investigation, that for a prince, it is better to be feared than loved. Because if you love your leader and he raises your taxes, you don't love him anymore. But if you give him reason to fear you, next year he'll fear you yet. So they will behave. So, was Vlad III, this incomplete picture that we have of him, a hero, or was he a monster? We'll see both sides of it. It depends on who one asks, and that's always the question of history. There are many sources. You go through and you try to pick out a rational view, balancing the opinions, seeing which ones are written in anger, which ones are written as favorable to the person, and trying to find your way to some kind of objective look. Who one asks is an important question. So, here's Wallachia. The Ottoman Empire is to the south. That would be the Turks. And the Turks were Muslim. And in that day and age, they were the leading civilization. Arts, sciences, literature. They were the leaders. They looked on Europe as backward frontier area. And they thought, wow, we should bring our advanced civilization to them. So they're always threatening Wallachia and Transylvania and Moldavia. The Austrian-Hungarian Empire is up on the left-hand side here. That is the Roman Catholic power in the area. And their interest was to see the Turks held back into their area. And during the time of Vlad, Constantinople, the great Eastern Christian center, was captured by the Turks. So they're a present menace. And the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, this Catholic empire, is very concerned. So they're going to want to see their people in charge of Wallachia and Transylvania. Up on the other corner, you see the Russian Empire, Eastern Orthodox. And they're interested in expansion. To the north, not shown on here, is Poland, which is also an expansive state. So in other words, these three small states that make up contemporary Romania were surrounded by voracious neighbors who would like to gobble them up and use them in real politics to expand their power. Beyond that, Wallachia was basically Eastern Orthodox, incompletely missionized, but Moldavia was Eastern Orthodox. Transylvania was Roman Catholic. Hungary saw themselves as the protector of Christianity, but that meant Roman Catholic. And of course we have Islam, and then Russia would be Eastern Orthodox, Russian Orthodox. And then Transylvania and Wallachia became primarily rural areas, invited in a lot of Germans. And those Germans collected in Saxony. That's why they become known as Saxons. And they move into these two countries, Wallachia and Transylvania, and they set up towns. They're trading people. And they build walled cities, and they thought, well, this would help us defend our territory. Many of them were Lutheran and Calvinists. So you not only have a mixture of peoples and a mixture of empires that want this area, now you have a mixture of religions as well. And in all this chaos, you needed strong leadership. Transylvania, which is Bram Stoker puts Dracula in Transylvania. It's really Wallachia. So he's a Wallachian prince, not a Transylvanian count. But Transylvania, which is the subject of the part of the story. Romanians made up 59%, almost 60% of the people. Who are the Romanians? We'll get into that a little bit. Hungarians, 25%. Germans, about 12%. So a number of different ethnic groups. And the Transylvanians are basically a rural population, with the Germans building trading cities. But otherwise, they're located in, this is the Carpathian Mountains, and they're heavily wooded. And the contact from one village to another can be through wooded roads, and the woods are foreboding. Remember, they don't have electric lights, they just have torches. So at the night, you hold your torch out in the flickering light, you see things move in the distance, and you wonder what they are. That's what always made scary movies for me in the black and white movie period. What was in the shadow? What's in the dark? When you can't see completely, your imagination runs wild. And so they were basically rural, living in these kind of villages. And because of that, they were religious, but they're also superstitious. And some of that superstition we may identify with the former pagan religions that didn't fade away completely. There were a lot of priestesses. We would maybe call them witches in a sense, but they practice white magic. They also have dark powers, dark magic. And there's also the Nosferatu. And the Nosferatu is the evil one. He's one that Count Dracula will become a Nosferatu and then as a vampire. So you cross yourself when you think the Nosferatu is around, or try to protect yourself religiously. Well, Dracula, when he's young, he comes into dangerous times. And his father is assassinated, so when it's uncertain that he'll be the prince. And he faces a lot of different challenges. The boyars are the rich landowners. In France and places like that, we might call them the lords or the nobles. But here, they're the landowners. And we call them the boyars or landowners because their peasants are not necessarily serfs. They don't have to serve in the same way. They're independent. And, but the boyars are very rich. The Saxon German cities are very rich. And Mehmed II, who thinks it's his duty to spread Islamic civilization to all the world, is also threatening the Hungarian monarchy that wants to make sure that whoever's in power in Wallachia can withstand the Turks, is always interfering. And then the fact that there's a rival dynasty clan that claims to lead Wallachia. So it's a very dangerous time. And these are some of the hilltop fortresses we saw. Joyce and I were in Transylvania in June. We took a trip down the Danube, and we had a 5-day post trip in Transylvania. Let's go back to that. You don't build a fortress like this in safe times. But this is just a place, I mean, this isn't a place you could live very long, but it's a place you can run to for refuge. But there's no area where a lot of people could live there very long. So it's built out of fear. And it just reminds me of the Cold War when we put all these big silos in North Dakota and places out west and put intercontinental ballistic missiles with nuclear warheads on them. You don't do that if you're feeling scared. You build stuff like that when you feel fearful. So this is Dracula's birthplace in Sighisoara, Transylvania. It was a depot connecting German states, the Baltics, and Poland to Constantinople. So from the west to the east, and a lot of trade flowed through. So these cities became quite wealthy. And that is the building in which Dracula, or Vlad III, was born. Dracula's birthplace is marked by a figure of a dragon, of course. It's now a restaurant. But his father was there living in exile. So he did spend some time in his early youth in Transylvania. And a lot of the interiors going to see, there's going to be some notes on them, but these interiors are from the Castle Dracula in Transylvania. It's the Chamber of Commerce, Castle Dracula. Because really his castle was in Vlad, but they do a good job selling this to tourists. He's Vlad. He ruled as a prince 3 different times and was overthrown by those different forces. But Vlad was the scene of his political power, the scene of his many horrors. Wow. And the headquarters of the Orthodox Church. So, very important to him. Vlad II, his father, was captured by the Turks, and 2 of his sons were held as hostages. And they were released on the promise of loyalty, or he was released on, and left Vlad and his brother as hostages. And as a result, for 6 years, he received an elite Turkish education. In fact, Mehmed II, the future leader that he's going to face, was a good friend of his. They played together and they were educated together. And the Sultan at the time just thought, you know, he's exposed to this advanced civilization, he'll go back, and when he becomes a prince of Wallachia, he's really going to favor us. But it worked the other way around. He learned to hate the Turks. Now, what kind of age was this? Look at the weapons. Look at the handle here with the ball with the spikes on it. You got up close to somebody and you swing and you hit them as hard as you can. Or the pikes with big point on with the axe handles and the axe. And all these are pretty brutal looking. But remember, back then, you could only kill so many people before your arm got really tight. Nowadays, we pull triggers or push buttons. We're much more efficient. You can do it 24 hours a day. Hardly exerting yourself at times. Or you can sit here in the United States in a building and watch on television as your drone shoots somebody down across the world. We've changed a lot. Vlad III was released when his father was assassinated, and his brother was blinded with red-hot irons. Oh. And then he was buried alive by the Hungarian warrior, a great noble named John Hunyadi in 1447. Well, then the Turks said, well, why are we holding Vlad? So he was let go. And he comes into Wallachia, and everybody looks at him and says, oh, there's a threat. You know, the current leader said, here's a threat to my rule. And other groups didn't necessarily want him. And so he went and he threw himself on the mercy of the guy who had assassinated his father and blinded his brother and killed him. And John Hunyadi accepts that. And he, as well as the Turks now, he'll also give him an elite education. He becomes his political mentor, and he is his military educator. And Vlad is a splendid warrior. He is really, really a good military leader. So Vlad III, Dracula as we know him, experienced Germanic culture in the atmosphere in the Hungarian court, because the Hungarians looked to the Germanic culture for guidance. The Hungarian court, well, the language Magyar isn't printed in a lot of books, but German language was, and this was the bigger culture. And so he experienced that part of culture as well. So this guy's pretty well educated. He was a brave warrior, And his main objective when he becomes prince is to rid Wallachia, the hated infidel, the Turks, non-Christians. In 1461-62, he challenged the Sultan Mehmed II. He knows him well. He knows their culture. He knows the military units and the way they behave. The Turks had captured Constantinople, and Pope Pius II had called for a crusade to drive out the Turks. Dracula was the only sovereign in Western Europe to answer the call. Nothing from France, nothing from the Germans, nothing from Hungary. But Dracula answers the call, raises an army, and in one movement he fights and wins a smaller battle, and he captures 20,000 Turks. And this is why he becomes known as the Impaler. He has those 20,000 Turks impaled. And that just means that you drive a stake through, you grease it, and you dull the peak so it doesn't perforate the heart or the liver. And if you do that and you do it correctly, they can hang on that pole for a day or two, living in agony. And so here's Mehmed with his bigger army driving up, and he drives his soldiers into the forest, the impaled forest. And you look around, and he's horrified, but he also said, this is a man with a strong will. We better retreat and think this over. And so they turned around and retreated. Tremendously cruel. 20,000 killed. But if this invasion would have carried forth, how many more would have died? You know, that's the same argument we have with putting nuclear weapons on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Yeah, it was, you know, we incinerated and exploded apart all kinds of human bodies. But if we invaded, it would have been a lot more. So it's kind of this, you know, same kind of idea going. In 1460, he invaded Transylvania as well with a Wallachian army, and he killed and maimed and impaled 10,000 of his former neighbors. He was toughest on the Germans because he doubted their loyalty. And many Germans fled back to Germany, and they told stories about this monster who would come in and tortured and killed and impaled these people. Well, that would have just disappeared in verbal history. But the printing press had been invented. Gutenberg was just about the same time, and these got printed and spread around. And they were the first bestsellers. So, impaled German monks and priests as well. He attacked and impaled some of them and relieved the monasteries of their wealth. They fled to Germany, wrote their stories. And these stories were the first printed non-religious literature of their time, so the Dracula story goes way, way back. And they become the sources read by Bram Stoker. Why did he choose this guy? Well, he's a bloody, strict, powerful man. This is Bran Castle near Brasov in Transylvania. It's the Chamber of Commerce or the tourist Castle Dracula. And I was thrilled to be there and look at it. It looks like it ought to be. It's built in the late 1300s, and you go, man, this is right. You know, this is the way it should be. And it was built by the Germans. They were given the right to do it by the Hungarian king at the time. But look at the way it commands a road that goes through a pass through the Carpathian Mountains. It's placed very, very well. This is Dracula's real castle in Wallachia. We didn't go there. This is a different picture. And why didn't we go there? Well, it's a ruin. Well, so is the other. Well, the other one's in pretty good shape, really. But it's inaccessible and remote, and there are 1,480 steps to get up to the castle. I went up over 900 steps to a Buddhist shrine in Myanmar one time. And the Eagle's Nest in Bhutan was 800-some steps, I believe. But you had to climb half a mountain to get to the steps. So I still, you know, and I was younger then. I don't know if I could make them, but we didn't get there. So this is King Louis I of Hungary gave the Saxons permission to build this, and just to prove that we were there. I always have to throw myself in a picture. I don't take selfies, so I got to have somebody else do it for me. We'll have you look at the Wisconsin W on the jacket.
So you go inside, and we've been looking at some of the interiors, but some of the neat things, you know, is you move a little furniture around, you open this thing, and all of a sudden you have a secret staircase that goes up to the keep. So if you're under attack, you can climb up into the tower and defend yourself in one last try at defense. We climbed up there. It's pretty cool. Dracula's ancestors go back to the Dacians, who were described themselves as wolfmen. Now, this is back in the Roman era, when the Dacians held the Danube area, and the Romans couldn't conquer them for a long, long time. But they did conquer them culturally, and they took on Latin as their language, and they felt Romans. And in fact, that's where Romania comes from. It's the land where the Romans still exist, their culture still exists. And note that idea of, you know, you can see where the Dot lived in Dacia. And they used the wolf as on their flags and as an identity. Let's see, what is one of the things Dracula can turn himself into? A wolf. Kind of ties in. And he is Dacian, by the way. Your background. Well, who was Dracula's stories? Give us our clues. But who tells the stories? These are German stories. The story of the burning of the beggars, old, sick, crippled, and the poor. Boy, that sounds terrible. Wallachia had just, you know, a lot of thievery and beggars and people who were roaming from place to place with no real role. So Vlad said, I'm going to hold a big banquet for you. Everybody come to this. And I'm going to supply your needs for life afterwards. And they came, and there was a big spread, and they ate, and they drank. And this is in a big hall. And when they were really drunk and satiated with food, he barred the doors and had the military light fires all the way around the building and killed them. And he said, there, now their needs are satisfied for the rest of their lives. They were all killed. The story of the two Turkish ambassadors and their hats. Well, they came from the Sultan, and they bowed down, they took off their hats. And Vlad sits there, and he says, well, you have skull caps on as well. Take those off as well. Well, sir, they returned, that is not the custom in our country. We never take those off. Oh, he said. And he sent for his servant, bring some tacks and some hammers. And he nailed the skull caps to their head. And then he said, go back and tell your leader, next time he sends somebody to me, they're in the presence of a great leader, they take their skull caps off. This gives you a little hints of his kind of character. A story of the merchant with a keen sense of smell. Part of that sadism comes from the fact that most stories will say that he enjoyed, when he impaled people, he enjoyed having picnics out around them and listening to them, their agony and looking at them. And he would invite people. And this one merchant came, and just before he sat down, he held his nose. Oh, you know, it smells really bad. He says, impale that man, but give him a high enough stake so he's above the smell. Oh. And so that was done. In the story of the two monks asked what his people thought of him, he said to one monk, what did the people think of me? And the monk said, well, you know, you have created order, but I must say your methods are inhuman. They're against the laws of God. When you go to St. Peter, after you die, you certainly won't make it into heaven. You must repent and change your ways. But he turned to the other monk and he said, well, what do my people say of me? Well, he said, they say that there is a lot of order in the land, that there is now peace so they can go to church on Sunday and worship properly, and that life is safe, their property is safe. And when you go to St. Peter, certainly St. Peter will say, you gave a good life to so many people, you deserve to be in heaven. Guess which one was impaled? The story of the 500 lawyers and nobles and merchants, how many princes could they remember? He asked the question at a banquet and got the guys talking, and they said, well, yeah, you know, we overthrew this guy, and then somebody would say, yeah, we got together against this guy. And at the end of the dinner, the ones who spoke up were arrested and they were impaled. A lesson, this guy is not going to be one of those. So he's It gives a lot about his character. The story of the Furgicorn merchant and the stolen 160 golden ducats. He came, this merchant, into town, and Dracula said, come into the castle, and we will eat, and then you sleep here tonight, and then you can be on your way. And he said, oh, my wagon with the goods and the golden ducats I have. Oh, don't worry, no one would dare take them. So overnight, somebody stole the golden ducats. He put out, Vlad put out the word, I want those golden ducats. And he got them back during the daytime. And the man was paid back his fortune. But he counted them, and he had 161. So he went back to the castle, and he said, I was robbed of 160 golden ducats. But sir, I have 161. I can't explain it. Aha. Vlad said, if you would not have come back, I would have impaled you. But as the case is, I will reward you. And he gave him rewards in a lot of business. The story of the gold cup at the public well. This golden cup was placed there with some ceremony, and it was never stolen. Says a lot. So that was Vlad, and you can judge for yourself a lot about him. Another possible source was Elizabeth Bathory of Hungary. She was a Hungarian, the elite, a high-born noble lady, and the wife of a war hero. She was noted for her physical beauty and her gracious manner. She carried herself well. She was in the highest of society. It's wonderful. But, and the Bathorys were some of the Central Europe's most illustrious families. She was raised as a Calvinist Protestant, and her family did compete for some power with the Catholic Habsburgs, but they also financed them. So they were really, really wealthy. At the age of 14, she was married to Frank Nassadi, and he died in 1604 in a battle. He was a war hero. Where would this example come? The young couple began life with more wealth than the Hungarian king, and they lent money to keep the kingdom afloat. And in the end, this maybe did her in, because the Hungarian monarch owed her a lot of money. And if she would disappear, the debt would disappear as well. Well, she went out into the village. She was getting older, and she went out into the villages where some of the pagan priestesses, we might call witches, were that practiced dark magic. And she said, I'm getting older, and I want to keep my youth. And 3 of the women, plus one young man that was kind of maybe mentally unstable, joined with her. And the tradition is that they killed a lot of the young women. They would hire them as maids, and they would just disappear. And after a while, people in the villages wouldn't let their daughters be hired at the castle anymore. And so then she started a school for young noblewomen. She was going to teach them how to be nobles. And they began to disappear as well. The tradition is that she bathed in their blood to restore her youthful appearance. That's tradition. Who's writing the stories, you know? Chastity Bites is a humorous horror movie, contemporary, where she comes to life in contemporary society. She was accused of many crimes, but only her low-born accomplices were found guilty and executed in terrible ways. There were up to 30 witnesses. They testified to about 50 killings. 2 witnesses testified to 200, and 1 testified to 650. So that, any one of those figures would make her one of the great serial killers of all time. And of course, using the blood to restore youth and to keep life going is kind of a Dracula kind of idea. This is her castle, which is past its prime, of course. It's a ruin now. And she was kept under house arrest in her palace. She died within 2 years, and the debt owed by the Hungarian monarchy kind of slipped away. When she was, some of her family members were among the ones who came in to stop her. And when they broke down the door and came in, they were torturing one young woman. There was a dead one right there, and several dead women in the castle. So the fact of her guilt is probably undeniable. How many were killed, that we don't know. Modern interpreters have converted her to a female vampire. Most certainly she did not have those 2 teeth. So this is how the Leila lived, if you want to know. Beautiful. This is from about that same period. Explorers were discovering the world. Galileo, Queen Elizabeth, Luther, Michelangelo, and Elizabeth Bathory. She was really fit into the scheme very well. It's an age of progress in art and science, but also considerable war and cruelty. So now we finally get to Bram Stoker. And he published this book in 1897, Dracula. And while the idea of vampires have been around, they've been around for a long time, the modern idea, he brings a lot of these ideas together and forms a real character. It was created in the mind of Bram Stoker. He lived from 1847 to 1912. He was an Irishman. So, of course, he brings his monster to England. And he was a Victorian, which just meant his women are pure of motive and cannot get riled up too much because they are hysterical and so forth, but the men are manly, okay? He did his research in the British Museum in London and conversations with a professor at the University of Budapest, Arminus van Berg, and he did research from 1890 to 97, so he did a lot of work on it. He was inspired by Walt Whitman's Old Carnality. It's okay to write about sex, be open with it. Oscar Wilde, who was a homosexual, said, no, you can talk about these things, it's open. Henry Irving he was an agent for Henry Irving. He was the main British actor at the time, and he was his agent. And so that's another one, and he was an angular, thin, haunted-looking character. And then Jack the Ripper was going. So he had plenty of examples there as well. He knew some of the stories about Vlad Tepes enough for him to say, aha, I love the name. In Transylvania, across Transylvania forest, across the forest, sounds really kind of creepy, and mysterious. So it's a Gothic novel, setting in a castle or ancient ruin. Dracula Castle and then Carfax Abbey, they're both ancient ruins, or a castle and an ancient ruin. The atmosphere of mystery and suspense, certainly. Ancient prophecies and superstitions, absolutely. Omens, portents, and visions, yes. Supernatural, otherwise inexplicable events, yes. High, even overwrought emotion, yes. Women in distress, yes. Women threatened by a powerful male, absolutely. In an atmosphere of gloom and horror, yes. So here is my image. Some people like other Draculas, but mine is Bela Lugosi from 1931 film. Haughty, controlling, ambitious, and desperate for blood. But he is reserved in the sense that he is a gentleman when you first meet him. And he will bow down and kiss your hand and shake your hand. And he has this law. He's 6 foot tall, which at that age was fairly tall. This is Christopher Lee's portrayal. Vampires are iconic figures of evil. They stand for evil for us even today. And we'll take a little more of a look at that a little later. They stalk the world in mortal dress. They look like us. If you see one at night, unless he shows his fangs, you don't know him. But they have special powers of the night. Dressed in black, with powers over bats, wolves, and rats. And they wear blood on their lips. It's a trophy. This is pure evil. For those of us who like our evil people, all evil, black, and our good people, all good, white. These are good symbols. If you look at the humanity of both, then it gets much more complicated. Here's Henry Irving. He dedicated his career to promoting this great actor. His role as Mephistopheles in the playhouse that's inspired Stoker's imagination, because they used all kinds of special lighting, and he was haunted looking, and he said, wow, this guy is it. He really, really looks like my Dracula. So let's go to the story. Bram Stoker's, I forgot that he, Dracula. Jonathan Harker's in Victorian books, often in diaries. This is in Jonathan Harker's diary. It differs from the 1931 film and other Dracula stories that you might see on film at times. He traveled to Count Dracula's castle to complete a real estate deal. The mountains were thick, the sounds of wolves, and the strange coachman make this journey into an evil nightmare. So he's journeying into a nightmare. His coachman refused to go further, and he's supposed to be met at this place, so he's dropped off, and these people take off because the last rays of light are shining, and they have to get back. This coachman comes and picks him up, and he doesn't say anything, just, go get into my coach. And then he's surrounded by wolves, and the coachman gets down and says, away, and the wolves leave. And Jonathan Harker goes, whoa. And this is Borgo Pass between Wallachia and Transylvania. Stoker converts this pass into a forejourneying, cliffs and thick woods and just a rough road, and this is the path to Dracula's castle, Bran Castle. So Jonathan Harker becomes the prisoner of the Count. He signs all the papers so that the Count now owns land in England, and he is a prisoner. Meanwhile, Dracula leaves on his own journey to bring his form of corruption and horror to England. So we have Harker's kind of exciting journey into Transylvania to sign these papers and see some of the world, and then we have a counter journey of Dracula going in quest of corrupting all of England. This is Whitby, England, where Dracula's ghost ship appeared, because, of course, he has to live on blood, so the crew, one by one, are killed as the boat comes to England. And the last one, the captain ties himself to the exterior of the wheel and is killed, and then the breath of Dracula mysteriously blows it ashore, the boat ashore at Whitby, and he can't step in the water. So when it's close enough to shore, he jumps on shore as a wolf, and people are mystified what happened to the crew. But they said, well, there's cargo here, we better unload it, and some of the cargo was for Carfax Abbey up on the top of the hill. So they delivered it. His first victim in England is Lucy Westenra. She's the best friend of Nina, Jonathan Harker's fiancée, oddly enough. So we have coincidence working in. And he comes to her, she's a sleepwalker, and he beckons her. And then he begins to invite her and to feast, and then eventually he has her taste some of his blood, which converts her then into a vampire as well. Nina sees Lucy sleepwalking and follows her, and she sees a dark shadow of a man bending over her, and is really, really frightened. Conflict, of course, is dark powers and mysterious powers of the earth versus white, fair, innocent maidens whom vampires want to corrupt. It's a literal war on women. And here we have, the St. George and the dragon. In this case, the dragon is Dracula, and the representation of Christianity is the fair maiden. And meanwhile, in Dr. Seward's asylum, and we'll get into him in just a bit, but Renfield, the guy I played in the play, is insane. And he's obsessed with devouring living things. And he's in psychic contact with Dracula. And he awaits the arrival of his master. So to understand all this stuff, Dr. Seward pulls in a guy from Belgium. He's a professor, Abraham van Helsing. He's a man of science and knowledgeable in the dark mystic powers of remote cultures. He is Bram Stoker's voice in the story. Bram is short for Abraham. So he even takes his real name. And he figures this all out. He says, we're under attack by a vampire. So we have our manly men, Jonathan Harker, who has recovered and returned to England. Texan Quincy Morris and Dr. Seward were both unsuccessful suitors for Lucy's hand. Before Dracula gets there, Lucy tells Mina, "Oh, I've had 3 proposals of marriage in one day. Can you beat that?" And these 2 were unsuccessful. But Lord Arthur Holmwood, or Lord Nagano, was Lucy's choice as their fiancé. And here Van Helsing tells her what the whole problem is, and so they search out her casket, and the wooden stake is given to Arthur here to put her finally at rest, as you must drive a stake through the heart and pin the soul to the ground that it's in, impalement in other words. And cut off the head and fill the mouth with wolfbane or garlic. But as she pounds the stake through, and really suffering doing this, all of a sudden they can see her pure Christian look coming back to her, even in death. And so they feel very satisfied that she's going back into heaven. He can't take much more, so he disappears from the story. But the other 2 continue on. So here's Dracula's powers disappear in daylight when he's faced with sacred Christian symbols, a crucifix or a host, or garlic or wolfbane. Dracula was ambitious, and he plotted the overthrow of the great power where Great Britain. He was going to create all kinds of vampires and corrupt all of England. And the Irishman in Stoker maybe enjoyed that idea a little bit. Bela Lugosi was a Hungarian, the actor, with a thick accent. He only had been off the boat for about a week or 2. He was 6 foot tall, and he fit the director Todd Brownie's image of the vampire. Very suave, very, he moved very, very regally. He signed, by the way, for $500 for a total of $3,500 for the film. Just think how many times that film's been shown. He died in 1956, and he was buried in his cave. To kill the vampire we've already mentioned, drive a stake through the heart, decapitate, and fill his mouth with garlic, or wolfbane. Here's Harker's fiancée, Mina, and she becomes the next target. She's kind of pale every morning, and they start giving her, each one of the guys gives her a transfusion. They didn't blood type at that time, so she lucked out, I think. And with Helsing's advice, they search out the coffins of Transylvanian soil, because when he left, I should have mentioned this a long time ago, but when he left Transylvania, he brought with him coffins filled with Transylvanian soil, because the vampire must be buried in his native soil. He rests in his native soil over the daylight hours. So they desecrate these. They put the Christian host in, or crucifixes, and so he can't use them anymore. And finally, he's desperate, so he gets on the ship and he goes back to Transylvania. These guys get on the train, modernism, and go down and interrupt his coach, stop it, chase off the gypsies, and the Texan, Quincy Morris, stabs him with his Bowie knife and kills him. And Quincy Morris is also hurt, and he also dies. They don't drive a wooden stake through him, and they didn't fill the mouth with wolfbane. So people often wonder, he was setting up a sequel where he comes back, he's written out really dead, but this ends this story anyway. So, the story takes place on a developed remote area with remnants of paganism, modernism versus rural superstitions, the modern city versus the rural area, the battle between Christianity and a form of paganism. Christianity proclaims the drinking of blood of Christ to have eternal life. Dracula opens his veins and has his victims drink his blood to attain eternal life. Dracula has a compulsive need to drink blood in order to exist in his unnatural state. He's a serial killer. If you watch Silence of the Lambs, let's say, Hannibal Lecter is a contemporary manifestation of the same kind of character. Nosferatu was shown here at the Grand, this is a couple Sundays ago. And that also is the Dracula story, but the Dracula here is named Graf Orlok, and he is a monster. He's played by Max Schreck, who scared the crap out of the rest of the crew. And he even sharpened his teeth with a file for this role. So you really identified with it. He was the living dead, and he killed a lot of people. But he was in Bremen, Germany, is where he went. And he kills a lot of people, and in the end is destroyed as well. He's kept up during the past the cock crowing, so he gets hit by the daylight. Some of these other journeys into madness. I really like Apocalypse Now, the Vietnam film, where Marlon Brando's Colonel Kurtz, who's back in the forests of Cambodia, and this primitive tribe that has all kinds of blood rituals, has been mutilating villages around, trying to destroy the Khmer Rouge, but also dominating the other people around there. He's a CIA agent who has gone out of control. And the assassin picked by the CIA is Captain Willard, played by Martin Sheen. And he goes up this in a gunboat up the river. And at one time they're attacked by bows and arrows, and his machine gunner is killed by a spear. So you're entering that primitive. You're going back in time, and you're getting into the power of this kind of primitive corner of the world. And he does assassinate Colonel Kurtz after trying to understand him and talking to him for quite a long time. And then if you leave before the credits of a movie are over, and you miss the fact that he calls in a B-52 strike, and you watch this primitive village being blown to bits by a B-52 strike. So our response to it is to just annihilate these primitive people, and blow them to bits and burn them crisp. The film is based on Joseph Conrad's great novel, The Heart of Darkness. A trip from civilization into madness is what I would call it. It's really, really well written. Or we can go to our modern manifestations of the Dracula figure, and that's the Isis. Why dress in black? Why hold the point pointed at the neck, the vulnerable neck? He's bringing us into the horror stories and the dreams, the nightmares. And Colonel Kurtz, when he's talking to Captain Willard in Apocalypse Now, says, the horror, the horror. Well, that's what we see here too. More people probably are decapitated in auto accidents and other ways during the year, but we don't pay that much attention to that. But this central image, the symbolism, is extremely powerful yet today. So Dracula is still with us. That nightmare is still around. The horror of the horror. Globalism does not mean only trade. It means that we exchange the darkness and evil of all corners of the earth as well. So we can't just think that we're spreading our trade to China and the Middle East and Africa, and that's it. We get their cultures rebounding onto us, just like the British Empire gets Dracula coming back at them. So we are in Romania, they're cashing in. Look how comical this character is. This is by the Dracula castle. The historical Vlad III is lost in this fictitious creation. He doesn't deserve to be lost. He was a significant historical fiction. Historical creature, rather. So pleasant dreams. Have a Halloween from Reverend Company Stories.
Just a reminder to please fill out an evaluation form on your way out. Either Linda or Carl will give you one of those as you go towards the back. And again, thank you to our speaker, Dracula. And just a note that was kind of cool. Our series, History Speaks, as of today, we have had over 1,000 people come to our talk, so thank you to all of you for that.